Good afternoon and welcome to Turning Back Time, Cutting Edge Regenerative Medicine Treatments. To start off, I want to tell you about something that happened to me. Last year, I was leaving work one day when I discovered my children had surprised me with a new license plate. MTB Doc for mountain biking doc, because if I'm not at home or I'm not at work seeing patients, you might find me on my mountain bike. Does anybody ski here? Now, I'm not very good on skis. Like a blue is about the best I can do, and even that with trepidation. But on a bike, my favorite trails are the blacks and the double blacks. So one day, after a medical conference in Park City, I asked my friend, where's a good short trail I can go on, because we've got a little bit of daylight left. And he said, go to Trailside. So I went to Trailside, and first I went on the beginner trail, and then I went on the intermediate trail, and then on the advanced trail, and then I said, okay, it's time for the expert trail. Now I do pretty decent on jumps, but one skill that I had not developed was drops, and especially not big drops. But I thought, I do double black, so I can handle this. So the launch was beautiful, but the next thing I knew it, I was on my side. And I thought, well, that didn't go so well. So I thought, well, I'll finish the rest of the trail. It can't be this hard. So I get back up, and then I feel a little discomfort right here. And then I go, oh, wait a minute. There's something sticking out that didn't used to be there. And that's something out happened to me, part of my clavicle. So I discovered how hard it is to pick up a bike and put it on a rack when your clavicle is broken. It's really hard. Don't try it. So I drove 250 miles home, and then the next day I went to church, and the next day I went to work, and then 3 days after that, I underwent jaw surgery, which had been previously scheduled, and had 4 root canals removed, 4 cavitations cleaned out, and bone harvesting and a bone graft. Now, the dentist, the biological dentist who is also here today, said, don't, you need to take the next few days off from work, and take it easy for the next few weeks, because you're going to be really sore, you're going to be really swollen, you're going to be black and blue. So that was the next day. And what did I do? I went to work. And I worked the next day and the next day and the next day. And then on Monday, I saw patients half the day, and then the other half, I went to have my clavicle repaired. And the orthopedic surgeon said, I said, so how long do I need to stay off my bike? And he said, 10 weeks. And I said, okay, perfect. So then I went to work the next day, and 21 days later, I was back on my bike, taking it a little bit lazy and easy to get started. And then 2 weeks later, I was back on one of my favorite double black diamond trails. I'm not a very obedient patient, as you can tell. But in conventional medicine, this would not have been possible. But with the miracles of regenerative medicine, all kinds of things are possible. I don't know about you, but I don't have time to be down, and neither does he. Every game he misses is a lot of money, in case you didn't know. Now, Sandy lost her mojo and couldn't figure out why she was unable to perform at the level that she's accustomed to performing in her business. She could not afford to not be on her A game. When we work with athletes and executives, we use the full scale of tools to help them get back into the game as quickly as possible. Who's this? Anybody know? Dave Asprey. He's a biohacker. Now, Dave, you might think Dave is crazy, but you know what he told us? He says, I was at a meeting with him, and he says, I'm going to live to be 180. Now, Dave, now, of course, you're like, oh, yeah, right. Dave uses every regenerative medicine tool on the planet, and he's got the money to do it, so he can handle that. But question is, what about you? Can you afford to be down? Can you afford to not be on your A game? Could you use better recovery when you have a surgery or an injury? Or when you are sick, have a disease? Could you stand to have better performance? Could you stand to live longer and healthier? Even 1 or 2 regenerative medicine treatments can be helpful, even if you aren't like Dave Asprey and can't afford everything. Now, you can't have a medical discussion without a disclaimer. Please consult with your physician before undertaking any treatments that could help you get better without the government's permission. So what is regenerative medicine? This is the branch of medicine that is focused on repairing, replacing, and or regenerating damaged tissues and organs. So we seek to restore function, enhance healing, improve quality of life, and increase both health span and lifespan. What's health span? Who knows what health span is? Who knows what lifespan is? How long you live. So health span is how long you live healthily. Now, it's odd that we actually have a branch of medicine that is devoted to restoring function, enhancing healing, and so forth, isn't it? Isn't that what all medicine is supposed to be? But it isn't. Because in medical school, what was I taught? I was taught to manage disease. I wasn't taught to prevent disease. I wasn't taught to cure disease. I wasn't taught to optimize health. I wasn't taught to optimize lifespan and health span, but just to manage disease with drugs and surgery. So in my office, I created what I call the healing pyramid to give ourselves and our patients a framework for what we are trying to accomplish and how we do it. So the foundation is a healthy mindset, and this is at the bottom for a reason. Incidentally, I have a patient who will never get better. She likes me, and so I keep seeing her, but she will never get better. And I'll tell you why she'll never get better, and that is because she can't think of a positive thought to save her life. And when she walks in for a visit, the first thing I say is, so what do you have to be grateful for today? Or what are you grateful for today? I don't know. Maybe my cat. You cannot get better without a healthy mindset. Now, I have another patient who also will not get better because he refuses to try any of the treatments that I recommend. Well, but what if this happens? And what if that happens? Well, I tried another treatment one time and I had a bad reaction. Okay, just keep having bad reactions to it and keep allowing fear to keep you from getting better. So we have to start with a healthy mindset. We need to follow that with a healthy lifestyle. This is foundational. Then we need to give the body what it needs. And after that, remove what does not belong. And finally, the tip of the pyramid is using tools that help the body heal itself. Notice I said, help the body. The tools don't do the healing, the body does the healing. God designed our bodies to heal. The problem is we put roadblocks in the way to keep our bodies sick. So here are a few points about healthy mindset, and you'll notice everything here is critical to health, whether you think it or not. In fact, one of the biggest problems in healing from cancer is a refusal to forgive self and others as one example. Healthy lifestyle. This is, as I said, foundational. We have to be eating real food, and we have to sleep without drugs. We've got to keep moving. We have to deal with our stress in healthy ways, nurture healthy relationships, pray and or meditate. And then, well, you know, if it's appropriate and possible, have as much sex as you can get. It's actually been proven to improve health. Then we need to give the body what it needs and is not getting. Unfortunately, in our food supply, we cannot get enough nutrients because of modern industrial farming techniques depleting the soil of nutrients. So sometimes we have to add specific nutrients back in that we just can't. You can't eat enough spinach to get enough magnesium for your body's needs. And of course, we have a crisis of hormone deficiencies nowadays because of so much toxicity and stress and lack of sleep and so many other, and Wi-Fi and so many other things. Then we need to remove from the body what does not belong there. And there's a lot of things that don't belong there. Now, 200 years ago, it was hard to get anything that didn't belong in your body because we didn't have toxins, we didn't have pollution, we didn't have cleaning chemicals, we didn't have glyphosate. And we didn't have root canals. Then we use tools to help the body heal itself. So this is just a sampling of regenerative medicine tools. Now, when regenerative medicine first became a thing, everyone was talking about stem cells. Stem cells are the bomb now. But there's a lot more to regenerative medicine than just stem cells. That's a very narrow-minded view. So I want to talk about just a few of these, and as we go through them, you will notice that there is a lot of overlap between the effects of different tools. You can address a given problem with 10 different tools. You'll also notice that none of these is a one-trick pony. We can use every one of these for 50 different things, which is really exciting about regenerative medicine. I'm sorry, I hope you'll indulge me as I share my love of my bike. It's right there up next to my wife in importance of in my love. Starting off with stem cells. What are stem cells? Stem cells are cells in everyone's body that can become any other cell type. So if you put it in the brain, it will become a brain cell. If you put it in your joint, it'll become a cartilage cell. If you put it in muscle, it can repair muscle. So these cells have miraculous potential, but there's a problem. They can only divide so many times, and then they're gone. They die. So we need to protect and love our stem cells as much as possible because they age, and when they age, they become inflammatory. But can we slow down the aging of our stem cells? Or is it just with every tick of the clock, they age? The answer is yes, we can slow the aging of our stem cells. How do stem cells work? They become specialized cells wherever we put them. And they secrete growth factors and immunomodulators and other bioactive chemicals in extracellular vesicles that we call exosomes. So exosomes come from stem cells, and exosomes have a lot of the same benefits. In fact, today, a lot of the stem cells that are injected into people are actually dead. So, and the reason is because They come frozen at minus 80 degrees, but then when we bring them up to 37 degrees, they break if they're not processed properly. And so those stem cells are dead by the time they actually get into your joint or your bloodstream or wherever we put them. So how can they still work? Because of the exosomes. And we can inject either stem cells or exosomes. Now, there are a number of different sources of stem cells. Embryonic, of course, comes from embryos, and fetal, of course, comes from abortions, and we don't do either of those because that's a big no-no. We don't tamper with human life. But the ones that are in common use are perinatal stem cells from umbilical cords and placentas, and then adult stem cells. We can get them from your hip, from your belly fat, if you've got any. Not that anybody in here would have any of that, but that's where we would take it from. And then we can also genetically reprogram some stem cells. And then we've got these things called V cells. Now, if we see here, as we age, the concentration of stem cells drops dramatically. How would you like to have the stem cells of an 80-year-old? Or I should say, who wants the stem cells of an 80-year-old? By raise of hand. Who wants the stem cells of a newborn baby? Because they have the most potential and they have the most division left in them and the least inflammation in them. So, personally, I know there are a lot of doctors who have good success. I'm not saying they don't work when they're taken from the hip or from abdominal fat, but I would rather have the stem cells that have the most division left in them, the most life left in them from newborn babies. So where do we get them from? We get them from Wharton's jelly. That's a little gooey stuff that is in the umbilical cord. And then the placental membrane, umbilical cord tissue, and umbilical cord blood. Now, what do these stem cells have in them? This is a treasure trove of regenerating tools that God gave us. And so it is quite a gem that we are able to harvest stem cells from placentas and umbilical cords of healthy newborn babies that have been, whose parents have been screened for everything imaginable, including the COVID shot, and are the healthiest we can possibly get on the planet. But those are a lot of great regenerating tools right there. One of the beauties of stem cells is how ingenious the body is in using them. An experiment was done where stem cells were injected into one arm, and within minutes, those stem cells were found in the other arm that was broken. They radio-labeled them so that they could see where they were going, and they congregated where the broken arm was. Amazing. Now, we can also use modern technology to tell stem cells where to go. So if a person has Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or wants to get younger, then there is this treatment called focused ultrasound. You inject the stem cells or exosomes into the arm, and then you send an ultrasound wave where you want them to go, and that's where they go. Now, there is a doctor, Sheldon Jordan in Southern California, who has a lab where they do this procedure that you can see right here. And we can see the effects of that procedure right there. All of these little pink dots are exosomes. On the left, we see the part of the brain that was not targeted with the ultrasound. On the right, we see the part of the brain that was targeted with ultrasound, and that's where all the exosomes went within minutes. Now, what Dr. Jordan has been doing, and unfortunately it's very restricted because it has to be under, instead of being able to do this as a widespread procedure to offer to anyone, because there are so many people suffering with many diseases that could be helped by it, the FDA requires it to be in a very restricted clinical trial, unless, of course, you go overseas, where you can do all kinds of things that actually help people heal. So what Dr. Jordan has been doing is targeting the hypothalamus with exosomes and demonstrating resetting of the biological clock. He's been targeting the hippocampus and has been able to reset memory in early Alzheimer's, or the prefrontal cortex, front of the brain, for depression, or the putamen and substantia nigra for Parkinson's disease. When he targets the hypothalamus, he has proven decreased stress and anxiety, improved recovery from exercise, deep sleep, more energy, fewer aches and pains, better skin, hair, and muscle, and improved drives, including sex drive. This is Dr. Jordan's 65-year-old wife, and no, she has not had plastic surgery or Botox. This is from targeting the hypothalamus with exosomes, with targeted ultrasound. So here are just a few things that stem cells are currently being used for with great benefit. Incidentally, I forgot to mention, at the end of my little presentation here, there's a QR code that you can scan if you want to get the slides, so you don't have to take all the pictures. Now, just last year, a miracle happened. Don't ask me how it happened. It was divine intervention, because the state of Utah, the Utah legislature, passed a law overriding the FDA and allowing Utah doctors to perform stem cell therapy without all the restrictions the FDA has been saddling us with, which is a huge game changer. And this is the law. But the reason this was necessary is because the FDA has put up every roadblock imaginable to the use of stem cells. And so this is why, if you know anything about stem cells, you know that most stem cell clinics are overseas, because they don't have the restrictions. And then in another miracle, RFK got put in as head of HHS and is now talking about, and hopefully we will soon see, that he is reining in the corrupt FDA, which was charged with the job of protecting Americans' health. But instead, the FDA has assumed the responsibility of protecting the American pharmaceutical industry, and thereby putting up, as a result, roadblocks to stem cells, peptides, hyperbaric therapy, IV chelation. He didn't mention hormone replacement, but the FDA has been going after hormone replacement for decades and tried to make it illegal. They haven't succeeded, but they've tried. So this is very exciting. It's an exciting time to be in regenerative medicine, both as doctors and as patients. Interestingly, to illustrate how damaging this has been, Guess where, I'm going to talk about peptides in a second here. Guess where a lot of our research on peptides has come from? Anybody know? Russia. In the 1980s and 90s, the FDA has set us at least 40 years behind because in a free country, we're not able to study and provide therapies that a communist country has been doing for decades. It's absurd. So, peptides. Peptides are fragments of proteins. Now, the human body makes over 7,000 peptides. Now, who can name a peptide? Everyone in this room can name a peptide, I swear to you. I shouldn't swear, sorry. But everyone in this room can name a peptide. It's called insulin. We've been doing peptide therapy for over 100 years. And just now we're able to start doing it therapeutically with other things than diabetes. So peptides can be hormones, they can be neurotransmitters, or other signaling molecules. And look at what we use peptides for. Everything you can imagine. You want better sex? There's a peptide for that. You want to recover from an injury or from surgery faster? There's a peptide for that. You want stronger muscles? You want to lose weight? You want better insulin sensitivity? You want more energy? You want your brain to function better? You want to think more clearly? There's a peptide for that. So peptides come in, most of them are injectable. We inject them in the belly, or we can inject them in places where we've got damage. Some of them you can rub on your skin for aesthetics and other problems. Some of them are nasal sprays, and some of them are pills. Here's a common, there are a lot of peptides that we actually use in practice, but I only have a few minutes, and so I can't go over them all, but I will just go through just a few of the more foundational ones, in my opinion. So TB4 is the peptide that I used when I broke my collarbone and had surgery on my jaw, because it decreases scar tissue, it fights infection, protects brain cells, promotes wound healing. It's anti-inflammatory, even helps with stroke. Now, at the end, I'm going to quiz you on this because this is some of the mechanism of action of thymosin beta 4. So there's going to be a test. Whoever passes gets a free bottle of TB4. Just kidding. Okay, another one is epitalon or epitalon, depending on what part of the country or world you're from. Epitalon is a wonderful peptide from the pineal gland that lengthens telomeres. Why do we care about telomeres? Because the shorter your telomeres, the shorter your life. Because as your telomeres, what's a telomere? That's the end of a chromosome. So on both ends of each chromosome, we have these little caps called telomeres. And as they get worn off, then you have fewer cell divisions. And then you get sicker. And then you die sooner. So epitalon has been shown, at least in mice, to lengthen lifespan by 40%. Now, there's a lot of research on mice that doesn't apply to humans because we aren't mice. And the problem is they haven't been doing this long enough to see how much longer humans can live on it. But it has been shown to increase lifespan. It restores circadian rhythm for people who are backwards, who want to sleep in the day and can't and are awake all night. Improves insulin sensitivity. Inhibits cancer. Strong antioxidant. Decreases bad cholesterol. decreases blood pressure, increases endurance, improves heart failure. So there's all kinds. It's crazy. One little molecule, look at all the crazy things that it does for us. It's amazing how versatile God's creations are, that they can accomplish so many things. You would think, well, like in conventional medicine, we kind of think we look for the drug that solves the problem. But here we've got a molecule that does a lot of things, solves a lot of problems. Okay, growth hormone secretagogues. There's a lot of them. Sermorelin is one example. Who doesn't want more energy, better memory, better sex, increased bone density, better mood, decreased body fat, decreased wrinkles, again, increased recovery, decreased inflammation. So there are a number of different growth hormone secreting peptides. Then we have TA1, which we use a lot for things like cancer, for infections like COVID, for pneumonia, for autoimmune disease of every kind. TA1 is very powerful from the thymus gland, which is behind your sternum. Now, there is a particular company, a laboratory, that sells peptides dirt cheap. And the reason it sells peptides dirt cheap is because they're not regulated. There's nobody inspecting them. And what they say on their website in plain English is not for human consumption. Well, the reason that it's not for human consumption is because they're not held to the same standard of safety and purity that compounding pharmacies are held to. And so it's very tempting to want to save money. Who doesn't want to save money? But you have no idea what you're getting. And peptides are prescriptions for a reason. They're meant to be used under medical supervision. Okay, next, I want to talk a little bit about pulse electromagnetic field therapy. In pulse electromagnetic field therapy, we have a generator that generates electromagnetic frequencies that go into the body. There are a lot of different PMF devices. The one we use adds the benefit of biofeedback so that we're not just giving you electromagnetic frequencies, but we're giving you the ones that your body asks for. We don't want to just give random ones. We want to do the ones that your body needs specifically. And so, this dates back to 1954, Japanese scientists discovering that bone cells emit electromagnetic frequencies and respond to electromagnetic frequencies. This is just a little chart of a few of the frequencies that have been identified. And so you could dial your electromagnetic frequency generator to a certain hertz, and that will stimulate bone cells to grow, or stimulate muscle cells or nerve cells. And so each part of our body responds to different types of frequencies. And we can see there are numerous applications for this. Chronic pain, arthritis, recovery from surgery. In fact, this is one I told you. What I didn't tell you after I crashed my bike in Park City was that I drove to my office in Springville and turned on my OnDomed device and gave myself a session of pulse electromagnetic field therapy so that I would have less bruising and less pain and not need any pain medicine. And I did the same thing on my way home from the dentist's office that following Thursday, and that's why I was able to show up to work without looking like a chipmunk with black and blue cheeks. So this is a critical part of our recovery protocol from injuries and surgery. It even lowers cholesterol. It even helps osteoporosis and heart disease and infections. Interestingly, I had a woman who was seeing her obstetrician, and she was diagnosed with with gestational diabetes. So he put her on the drug for that, and it was causing horrible side effects. She could not tolerate it, and it wasn't even lowering her blood sugars. So one day she was asking me, what can I do? And I said, come here, use my little machine here. And I ran a program on her and sent her on her way. 2 weeks later, she comes up to my wife and she says, my blood sugars dropped 20 points. And my doctor has said I don't have to go back on that horrible drug. Who knew? So, again, lots of applications. In fact, this is a critical part of our concussion protocol because it reduces inflammation in the brain that leads to dementia down the road, years, decades after a concussion. One day, I was down in Zions National Park and I ran up to Angel's Landing. Anybody ever been to Angel's Landing? I ran up to Angel's Landing with a heavy day pack on, and I don't know if you've ever tried that, but your forearms get really sore. I don't know why, but they get really sore. And so a week later, I had a thermogram. Now, Kelly Wobrock, a friend of mine, is actually competing with me and stealing some of my audience right now because she's in another room talking about thermograms. But she had her thermogram camera at my office this day, 1 week after I ran up to Angel's Landing. And this is what my forearms looked like because I said, man, these are sore. I want to see what it looks like on thermogram. And that's what it looked like. That yellow is intense heat. So then I ran 30-minute session of OnDemed, and that's what it looked like. 30 minutes later. How crazy is that? Or how about this? A girl comes in with Bell's palsy. Ran a session, that's 2 hours later. Or this woman who is a half marathoner. Every 6 months she would run a half marathon. She ran a half marathon the next day. She had bilateral Achilles tendonitis. She could hardly walk. She saw the orthopedic surgeons. She took the drugs. She saw the physical therapist for 6 months, and she was not getting better for 6 months. And then she came to me and said, do you have any idea? And I said, yeah, let's try this machine. She did one session, and she came back and said, Dr. Andrew, that's a miracle. She did 2 more sessions, and then she ran a half marathon. And this illustrates an important part of regenerative medicine, and that is one of the great benefits of regenerative medicine, regardless of what tool we use, is that it helps the body get unstuck. How often do I hear somebody saying, I've been trying this, I've been trying that, I've done everything the doctors have told me to, and I'm not getting better. All of these regenerative medicine tools help the body get unstuck and move off that plateau so it can finally get better. This lady was scheduled for amputation. After 9 treatments, they canceled the surgery because she no longer had gangrene. She'd already had one of her toes amputated. Now this is not me. This is my crazy son. Had it been me, I would have needed a lot more stem cells and a lot more OnDemed and a lot more peptides because I would have broken a lot more bones than just a clavicle. Next tool I want to talk about briefly is prolozone. Prolozone is a combination of ozone gas and vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and it uses the power of oxygen to stimulate damaged tissues to heal. increases circulation, improves oxygen utilization, reduces free radicals, decreases acidosis. Incidentally, acidosis is an important cause of pain. When you have pain in a joint or muscle, just about anywhere, acidosis is a big part of it. Ozone kills infections because infections can't tolerate that high oxygen concentration. It delivers mitochondrial nutrients, anti-inflammatories, eliminates pain, stimulates repair. So that just talks a little bit about the different components of prolozone. And here are a few of the things we use prolozone for. It's just like crazy. Sciatica, chronic low back pain, neck pain, menstrual migraines, fibromyalgia, endometriosis, heavy periods, painful periods, scars, carpal tunnel. I hear about people who've had carpal tunnel surgery, and I say, dang it, I wish you would have come here 1 year ago because you don't need surgery for carpal tunnel. Well, this is what happens when you don't quite clear the jump. Fortunately, I didn't break anything that time. Okay, next thing is hyperbaric oxygen. We have a vendor here that has an office here that offers hyperbaric oxygen. This is where we provide increased oxygen pressure while breathing 100% oxygen. And what that does, so our red blood cells are what carry our oxygen, right? That's what they're designed for. But you can only handle so much. I mean, our red blood cells are normally between 95 and 100% saturated with oxygen. That's what happens when they put that little thing on your finger that measures your saturation. So you can't get any higher than 100% oxygen saturation in your red blood cells. So what we can do with hyperbaric oxygen is force extra oxygen to dissolve into the bloodstream without the red blood cells. And we can, instead of having 50 to 80 milligrams of mercury of pressure of oxygen in the bloodstream, we can increase it to 400 millimeters of mercury. And the benefit of that is red blood cells, even as small as they are, they're really big. And so the oxygen molecules that are dissolved in the plasma of the blood can get into tight places that the red blood cells can't get to stimulate healing. So here are a few of the many effects of hyperbaric oxygen. Incidentally, I want to highlight here, it says in the bottom in the center, it says epigenetic expression. Hyperbaric oxygen has actually been demonstrated to change the expression of genes. So we all think, okay, you've got your genes, and your genes determine the color of your hair and your eyes and so forth, and whether you can be tall or short and whatnot. But all day long, our cells are deciding which genes to activate and which genes to silence to accomplish what we need them to. Hyperbaric modifies that genetic expression to stimulate healing. In fact, it modifies over 8,000 genes. And again, increases telomeres, which increases lifespan, decreases cellular senescence. Your cells get old just like we do. And when your cells are decrepit, then they don't function like they used to, and they get in the way of your health. And so this decreases cellular senescence, increases stamina and endurance. And so here's a short list of things that hyperbaric oxygen has been found to help with. All kinds of things. Again, there's no one-trick ponies in regenerative medicine. Okay, shockwave. Medical treatment uses sound waves to stimulate the body's natural healing processes. It causes mechanical stimulation of cells to increase cytokine and growth factor expression. And if I had let's just suppose for a moment that I broke my clavicle, just hypothetically speaking, and I applied shockwave to that clavicle, guess what would happen? Stem cells from all over my body would come to that clavicle to stimulate repair, because the shockwave device is producing a stimulation of that area that says, hey guys, come on over here, there's a problem here. I need some more help than you're already giving me. It also breaks down arterial plaques, which is why we can use it for erectile dysfunction. That's one of the reasons, because it breaks down plaques in the penis, just like we have plaques in the coronary arteries that cause heart attacks. Stimulates healing, decreases pain, recruits stem cells, decreases inflammation, increases blood flow. And again, lots of wonderful things that shockwave can do. This is what happened when my cousin jumped off a jump that he hadn't been to before in Moab called Dave's Trail. I don't recommend it. I don't even try it myself because it's hairy. PRP. We draw platelets out of your arm and then spin them down in a special centrifuge, and then we get the platelets out of them, and these platelets are full of growth factors. And those growth factors do what? Stimulate stem cells. And here are some of those growth factors. And here are some of the applications for PRP. Again, PRP is mostly used for damaged tissues like arthritis, arthritic joints, but it's also used for aesthetics, to make people look better, and for sexual enhancement. Now, we always hear, oh, but these treatments are not proven, they're not FDA approved, they must not be effective, and they must not be safe. In fact, we recently had a case. Who saw the news? Did anybody see the news? A 5-year-old boy died in an explosion in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber in Michigan. And so then the Michigan Attorney General jumped to charge 4 of the owners and workers, staff there at this facility with murder, of all things. Turn a tragedy into a political game. Well, the reason I bring up this story is because there was one boy who died tragically from hyperbaric oxygen out of the millions of treatments that have been done in the United States in several decades. That's an unbelievable safety record. The fact that it would make news is insane. Talk about overreach. When the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, 7 people died. They found the culprits. These were people who overrode the engineers and said, no, we're going to move ahead even though you've identified a flaw, a defect in the O-rings. We have to stay on schedule. Those people should have been charged with murder. And to put this into further perspective, the number 3 cause of death in America is prescription drugs. And we're not talking about overdoses. These are prescription drugs that are taken as prescribed. Now, if every doctor and pharmaceutical company had been charged with murder for every person who died from a prescription drug, we would have no doctors, well, very few doctors, and no pharmaceutical companies anymore. That's the hypocrisy of our modern system. And in fact, that amounts to 100,000 people a year, 100,000 people a year who die of prescription drugs. That's 548 Americans a day. If the largest 747 crashed every single day, do you think there'd be any 747s in the sky today? But there are still all these prescription drugs that are not properly regulated. So if you haven't noticed, our society holds regenerative medicine to a much higher standard than conventional medicine. But the good news is that regenerative medicine lives up to that higher standard because it is far more effective and far safer. So is it the magic bullet? Well, let me tell you a quick story about a patient of mine. She saw an advertisement for an orthopedic surgeon from New York who went to New Antigua to do stem cell therapy. She spent $15,000 getting a bunch of stem cells all over her body. And then she came back and she said, it didn't work. So remember what I said in the very beginning. We do the foundation first. If you were a fish, would you want to live in that fish bowl? Would you put a healthy fish in that fish bowl? Would you put stem cells from a newborn baby in that fish bowl? In that unhealthy body? No, you'd want to put it in that fish bowl. So you have to clean up the terrain first. You can't expect the magic bullet to cure everything when you're not doing the foundation. Powerful tools don't act alone. None of these treatments cures anything, but they can help practically everything because they empower the body to heal itself. And so we focus on the foundation and we work our way up. Can we age in reverse? So chronological age is the number of birthdays you've had, but that's a poor predictor of health span and lifespan. Would you rather be that young man or that old man? One is older, but he's actually younger. And look at the difference between our current health span and lifespan. We're living 9.2 years on average beyond the time that we have a reasonable amount of health. We have to close that gap. So we can measure biological age, which is a better predictor of health than how old we are. And how do we do that? We can measure telomeres. We can measure do active metabolic testing, glycan age, and there's other markers. This is how we measure biological age using metabolic testing. Do we want a longer life or do we want a better life? Or do we want both? Do we want freedom from disease alone? Or do we want freedom to also do what you love? Just because you don't have disease doesn't mean you're able to do what you love when you're older. Are you ready to turn back the clock of time? Brooke Shields said, I don't just want to be around to see my grandkids one day. I want to be able to get on the floor and play with them and get back up on my own. I want to be able to pick them up without moaning and carry them across the park. So there you have it. There's a QR code if you want to get the slides. And thank you very much.